This is my only true gift in writing. It's the only one I really have, is that I don't edit myself at all. Really, sometimes I write the entire play without editing. Actually, I usually do that. I usually write the whole play and don't go back and edit anything until I'm done.
Wow. That is a gift. That is a superpower that I think a lot of writers wish they had.
Yeah. But it's only because, Jason, it's not that I don't care. It's that I don't have an expectation that it's going to be good. My expectation is to finish the story I'm trying to tell. And if I get in the way of trying to make it good, I'm not going to finish it. It's like a feeling, like an itch.
Yeah.
I got to scratch the whole itch before I can go back and deal with it.
That was the voice of playwright, actor, singer, dancer, and film producer Sarah Bierstock, opening up this week's episode of the Page and Stage podcast. I'm your host, Jason Cannon, and we'll be getting to Sarah and all her hyphens and hats in just a sec. But first, today is Thursday, June 13, and that means tomorrow is Friday, June 14. What's the big deal about Friday, June 14? Well, tomorrow, Scotty and I, and that's Scott Aaron Price, the star of the one-man show I wrote and directed, Clowns Like Me, we and our amazing production stage manager, Jeff, are all hopping on a plane and flying to New York City because Clowns Like Me is going off-Broadway. We'll be going right into tech rehearsals, and then previews will start on June 21, and the show will open at the DR2 Theater right next to Union Square on June 30, and run through August 18. Still sort of feels like a dream, but it's going to get really real fast tomorrow. All the info and tickets are at clownslikeme.com. And of course, I'll keep you updated here and in my newsletter about how we're doing. Honestly, Scotty and I are so grateful to all of you out there. So many of you either came to the show in Sarasota or sent messages of excitement and encouragement after hearing Scotty's podcast episode or reading about our adventure in the paper or online. We're just utterly humbled by the support and the response. So thank you. And we promise we will do Sarasota proud up there. And don't worry, the podcast and newsletter will still be coming your way each week, even while I'm up in New York. In fact, stay tuned because I've got some really cool updates in the works. But that's for next week. This week, you get to meet Sarah Bierstock. As a playwright, Sarah has been nominated for the Blackburn Prize and Primus Prize, and she is a proud member of both the Playwrights Collective at Florida Studio Theater and the Dorset Theater Festival's Women Artists Writing Group. She has received multiple commissions from multiple theaters, and her first play, Honor Killing, has a list of like 24 readings and festivals and awards attached to it. So rather than reading them all off here, just go check out her website in the show notes. Another of her plays, Pandora's Suitcase, is being produced by Syracuse Stage and will tour through New York State this fall. As a performer, Sarah has toured nationally and appeared off-Broadway many times. She also does audiobook narration and teaches scene study as an adjunct professor at Marymount Manhattan College. And because clearly she needed more to do, she also formed Pass the Salt Productions in 2022, and the first batch of short films produced by Pass the Salt have already garnered multiple nominations and awards for Best Experimental Film and Cinematography. Like I said, hyphens and hats. Here we go with my conversation with Sarah Bierstock. I am online with the, is it quadruple or quintuple hyphenate? I'm not even sure. Playwright, actor, producer, filmmaker, jack of all trades, Sarah Bierstock. What's kind of fun is that Sarah was one of my first interviews several weeks ago, but there was some kind of audio gremlin that took over one of our mics, both of our mics, not even sure. We have fixed the problem and we are going to talk again. Sarah, thank you so much for giving me your time twice, above and beyond.
I'm delighted to be here again, and thank you for all those hyphenates. I'll take them.
Yeah, so you have cats. I have dogs, and I'm hoping they don't bark, although I'll just edit that out if it happens. But I do know that your cats both have names that are meaningful to you and your family. Could you tell us about that?
I would say the most meaningful thing about their names is that I did not get to name them. Because when you have small children and when you have a husband that has no one else in the house that's male and a male cat enters, you lose all rights to naming things. So our male cat is Loki, Loki, which is
Oh,
the Norse god of mischief, and he is
oh
indeed very
yeah.
mischievous. And our female cat is Tutu, Tutu, who you would like to think is, maybe named after Desmond Tutu or something profound
Yes,
or in any
very
way kind of,
profound.
influential or literary or anything. No.
But
After the
no.
actual, nope, dancing ballet Tutu, which my 6-year-old said, I think I may have told you this before. She said, "Mommy, I've been waiting for this for months. Don't take this away from me." So they won those arguments, and those are their names, Loki and
Sounds-
Tutu.
She sounds like she has the dramatic streak. Does she perhaps get that from?
I have no comment on that. Yes.
Okay. Hey,
It's to be determined and yet very clear.
TBD.
Mhm.
Loki is actually right up my alley because my dogs are named Gaia and Odin. Odin especially, right in
Mhm.
line, right in
Yeah.
line. But yeah, it
Yep.
definitely sounds like the little ones rule the roost there.
In more ways than are healthy. Yes.
But that must be, in a way, some of your most recent work is in the TYA field. And for listeners who aren't familiar, TYA stands for Theater for Young Audiences. And I think your last 2 plays, in fact, right, are both in that TYA lane.
Mhm.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
for
they
it. How
are.
did that come
I
about?
mean, I didn't necessarily rate them in a chronological order because sometimes you start a play and then leave it and come back to it. So one of my plays, like technically, is more recently something I've been have dived into because I took it out and put it back in the drawer a couple of times. That one is for adults. But the last 2 plays, one of them is called Grace's Land 2.0. That is a youth piece. It is for ages pretty much like 14 to 18. And then the one that's for little kids, which is really ages, I'd say 1st grade through 5th grade, so sort of 6, 7 to 10, is called Pandora Suitcase. And that one is actually about to tour with Syracuse Stage.
Oh,
And
great.
it'll tour all over within a 60-mile radius of Syracuse in the fall. So I'm super excited about that.
That's fantastic. Back when we met, I was still at Florida Studio Theater, and that's
Yeah.
where these plays, especially Pandora's Suitcase, especially got their start.
Yes.
Share a bit of the story of how Pandora's Suitcase came to be, because I think this origin story is fascinating.
So I was really fortunate to be one of the people that FST gave a commission to right when the pandemic started. It was June 2020, and I got a call from Caroline, who runs the children's programming department at FST, and said, "I thought of you for a children's piece." And I kind of laughed because my other piece that they had produced was Honor Killing, which is
not a kid's play.
not for children. And not even for all adults because it's so heavy, but it's, highly political and really intense subject matter and heady and in no way something for youth. But she said to me, which I really admired, she said, I love that you don't shy away from big ideas. She said, you have this opportunity. All you need to do is pick a myth of your choice and adapt it. And I thought, well, that's a challenge. I have absolutely no idea how to do that. And I started to think about, obviously 2020, June, we were all in a really rough place.
Yeah.
And I was quarantining with my kids and they were so little. And it was a really hard time. And the only thing I could think to be a positive contribution to the world was something about hope. So I chose Pandora, the myth Pandora, Pandora's box, because I was, thinking, what can I give that's going to be in any way beneficial? So when I first started writing that adaptation, what I didn't understand was that I had room to write a loose adaptation because I'd never been commissioned to do that before, and I'd never written in this style before for young audiences. My first pass was a massive learning curve. Stylistically, I basically was overwriting and then going back and pulling out, kind of simplifying not the subject matter, but just keeping the ideas a little tighter. And I wrote the whole adaptation. I submitted it. They did a reading. They said, "Thank you very much." And I said, "Great. I hate this. I'm so bored by what I've written. Thank you. I'm so grateful for the opportunity, but this is just really not moving me." And Caroline said, listen, you have fulfilled what we asked you to do. We're happy with it. But if you want to take another pass, like we're game to see where this goes. She just gave me permission. She said, as long as there's any kind of box that's not supposed to be opened that gets opened, you can write about whatever you want to write about. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know that. That really changes things. So I then said to her, well, when I was in my teens, because again, I'm still trying to stay focused on like what's going on in the world right now. And everyone was and so anxious, so stressed, and for very real reasons. I said I had seen a therapist in my late teens, and I was also struggling with anxiety at the time. And he had given me this wonderful exercise, which was about imagining putting all of your worries into a suitcase and then bringing that suitcase down to the water and putting it on a boat and watching the boat sail away with your suitcase of worries on it while you sort of stayed centered and could learn how to have an emotion and allow it to be true, but not have it take over your entire identity. I was thinking about that. I said to Caroline, I'd like to incorporate this idea of a suitcase and about giving children this kind of tangible exercise where they have a place to put their worries, a place to put their fears, and then like learning how to be free of those fears because they can separate themselves from them. And she said, listen, if that works for you, let's see what happens. So I ended up writing initially a couple of monologues for this character because I didn't have the whole story in mind, but I did have a character and some qualities about that character I wanted to explore. So I wrote a bunch of monologues for Pandora, who I called Pandy, and kind of found her rhythm, found her voice, I had this sense of her being really fast talking and quirky and smart, and I found her language first.
Yeah.
Sent them to Caroline. She gave me a lot of feedback, and I started to fly with it. I started to build this idea around this little girl who was living with some very real stresses. Parents were divorced. She was changing schools, and she was almost obsessed with, sort of fixated on climate change and environmental sciences. Through that back and forth with Caroline and those ideas, I was able to restructure a whole story that was just far more organic and interesting and more connected to me. And therefore, I could tell a more, compelling and eventually just positive and hopeful story. But it came from this initial invitation to create this piece, and then I threw it out and recreated it from scratch. So it was a long beginning. It was a long beginning. Yeah.
There's two things that jump out there that I want to press on, Sarah. One is you used the word permission. I think is just so key for any storytellers out there, that Caroline gave you permission. And she was kind of your key collaborator as well through this
she really
process.
Was.
The one, and she just kept saying over and over, go try it. That was constant, that her collaborative tool with you was stop getting in your own way, basically. Right? Stop overthinking it and just, you have permission. You don't need to check in. And I'm wondering for you if that was a new idea, if that's something you've incorporated now, like where does permission come from when you're an artist or a storyteller? How do you self-motor that permission? Is it useful to have an outsider continually remind you have permission? Just talk a little bit about that idea of permission as it relates to collaboration for you.
So it's really interesting. I mean, I unequivocally would not have written this piece had I not been given the opportunity to do it. If someone hadn't reached out to me and say, I'd like to commission you, it wasn't like I had this percolating idea in my mind to begin with. So for starters, I have to absolutely just give credit to, it would not exist without FST, specifically Caroline. And it most certainly would not exist in the form that it exists in now had she not been my collaborator. Not only because she gave me permission, which I'll come back to, but because she made herself so available for feedback and guidance. And because I was new to writing TYAs, I really needed it. I really needed someone to kind of course correct and or reflect back to me what I was saying and what was working and what wasn't working. I had never worked with anyone like that before on a play, ever. Still haven't. Writing can be very lonely and very isolating.
Yeah.
And very often when you're sharing a draft, it's like, you're well into the draft or multiple drafts. It's not usually this collaborative process from the beginning. So she not only helped me set tone, she helped me sort of dissect what was too advanced for the age and what was really on the money and how to keep it action driven. So she was highly influential to the way this developed. And in terms of permission, I mean, it's funny because I don't feel like I often am seeking permission, but in this case, I really did and was because I didn't understand. I'd never been given the ability to do an adaptation before.
Right.
So I really didn't know what that meant. I really didn't know if there was a standard and who made that standard.
Right.
And really that came down to like, well, those are questions that I'm allowed to ask. I coulda, woulda, should have said, okay, what does that mean to you guys? I would be
Right.
delighted to do that. What does that mean? And because I was feeling so grateful and in the trenches because of COVID, like that someone was going to pay me to write something in the middle of a global disaster, I just said yes. I didn't even say like, okay, so let's get specific about what you're looking
Right.
for, because then I could have given myself permission perhaps. But, I think sometimes as an artist, we become so just, oh my God, someone's going to pay me to do this.
Right.
You just say yes and say thank you without getting a little more information, A, and B, realizing you really, they're coming to you for a reason. You have something to contribute. You have value. It is appropriate to ask questions respectfully. And in this case, fortunately, I was in a situation where she was willing and able to provide that information for me, and as it went on. But had she not been willing to take that journey with me, and had I not asked down the line, it would never have happened. Never have happened.
Yeah. Something else as you were talking about the genesis and especially the second draft. The first draft, if you'd only asked those questions early, Sarah, we could have avoided the whole first awful draft.
I know. So true. So true.
But in the second draft, this caught my ear too. I was really curious about this in terms of process. You said you didn't start with a plot in mind. You didn't start even with her idea of climate change being anything in the character. It wasn't topic driven. It was just you sat down and wrote monologues, some of which I'm guessing didn't even get into the play. It was just
most of which didn't.
Yeah. It was just your way of sort of excavating the character of Pandora. And I'm going to stick a pin in that too, because your acting background, I'm curious how that might connect there.
Yeah,
but
I was thinking that too.
Yeah, your process was to write monologues until you found her voice. Is that something you typically do when you write? Was that kind of a one-off with Pandora? Do you think that really is tied to your acting background? Like, was that just an impulse you had, or was that a choice?
It was an impulse. I think it absolutely has to do with my acting background. But that being said, I think it's an excellent exercise for anyone, well, first of all, I never have, usually I don't have a full plot line in mind. Usually when I write something, I'm compelled by something. It could be even something like an aesthetic that I see visually in my mind that I'm almost being inspired by and start writing because I see something. So I don't ever sit down and go, I know I'm writing a story about this idea and this is where it's going. I'm not that writer. I don't work that way. And I almost never know what's going to happen to my characters at all until it's happening. So I give myself a lot of freedom when I start writing to just let it come out, let it flow, let the character inform as I'm writing, to find things organically, let their personalities, let all the conflict kind of bubble out of what just happens to be coming out of me in that moment, and then over time as I develop it. So back to the monologues, as you said, I am an actor. I have studied text most of my life.
Right.
I know that, when I'm exploring a character, you're very lucky to be given an entire monologue. Usually your character doesn't speak in speeches, and so you have to go back and dissect the whole script. But if you do have a whole monologue, I mean, you're learning infinite information about this person. And sometimes it can even be kind of stream of conscious. And so if you're writing something stream of conscious about that a character's, their ideas, and it helps kind of flush out, like, what are their ideas? What might they, if they had, if there was an unlimited amount of space for them to talk, what would they say? And what would it sound like? And what's their cadence like? And are they fast speakers? Are they slow speakers? Are they elliptical in their thinking. Like it just is kind of blew the door open or blows the door open to how a character might express themselves in a more substantial way. Then you can find what works and throw out what doesn't and get inspired by something that you weren't, planning to write. And so for me, with her, I heard her in my mind. I heard that she was going to be fast talking. I heard that she was quick and quippy and funny and quirky and I just kind of had to get it out, just put it on the page, and not feel like it had to be within a construct of a scene. Again, permission.
Right.
Give myself permission to write too much, write badly, write things you weren't going to use, and let that inspire something that does work, and you can pluck out those gems.
Yeah.
That was a long answer. Sorry.
No, great. As you were talking, it reminded me of how when I'm teaching writers, either in fiction or memoir, that it's the word I tend to use is don't get precious on the front end.
Yeah. Ugh,
right?
Yes.
Don't edit as you go. First drafts, especially from the gut. The less your head is involved in a first draft, the better.
Yeah. This is my only true gift in writing. It's the only one I really have, is that I don't edit myself at all. Really, sometimes I write the entire play without editing. Actually, I usually do that. I usually write the whole play and don't go back and edit anything until I'm done.
Wow. That is a gift. That is a superpower that I think a lot of writers wish they had.
Yeah. But it's only because, Jason, it's not that I don't care. It's that I don't have an expectation that it's going to be good. My expectation is to finish the story I'm trying to tell. And if I get in the way of trying to make it good, I'm not going to finish it. It's like a feeling, like an itch.
Yeah.
I got to scratch the whole itch before I can go back and deal with it. And sometimes I will write an entire scene or two scenes in totality and then go back and edit those before I continue. But I don't ever edit until that whatever section I'm working on, I allow myself to write the entirety of it.
Until there's a sense of completion of something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking a little bit about your actor background. So let's dig in there just a little bit, just to kind of get a bigger picture here.
Sure.
You didn't start as a playwright.
No, sir.
Your origin story is that it was acting, singing, dancing.
Mm-hmm.
When did that theater bug bite you, and what was your kind of career path before the playwriting bug bit you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I started taking voice, theater, and dance when I was 9. I attended a conservatory for, I went to a regular high school, but in the evenings and on the weekends, I went to a conservatory for all those classes, and then was always in their repertory companies and their shows on the weekends all the way up until 18. And went to NYU for musical theater. I transferred out of there. So I did kind of have an eclectic college experience. I did 2 years at Tisch, Cap 21 for musical theater. Then I went to Ireland for a year and performed. I stopped studying theater. At that point, I was like, I have been doing theater my entire life. I am going to just do some performing while I'm here, which I did, which was wonderful. But I was studying philosophy.
Oh.
Yep. And hard left. And then came back to the States and transferred to and graduated from Bard College. And part of why I went to Bard was that Bard let me create my own major because I had so many credits at that point. So I created a major called, I called it the philosophy of art. And I combined.
Super niche. Yeah.
Listen, not for everybody. I combined it with some musical theater and philosophy, and I did write a 1-act play and then wrote my thesis about the play. It really was not like a foreshadowing for my writing career. It was really just a way for me to combine these two areas because I had been in school for, at that point, 5 years, and I just wanted to, move on. But I did. That is when I first sort of started dabbling in playwriting, and it was a hard entrance because it was, I was exploring certain philosophical concepts that were really not well executed. But anyway, they gave me a degree. So it was okay.
So you got the degree, and then was it New York? Was it tours? Was it?
Yep. So then I quickly put the philosophy degree on the shelf, went straight back to musical theater, came back to New York, got my equity card, did a bunch of national tours, a couple Broadway shows, was mostly singing. I mean, I was occasionally in a play, but normally was doing musicals, and did that off and on until 2014 when I started writing Honor Killing. And that was not with the intention. There was no part of me that went like, I'm going to be a playwright now. I just simply got really inspired by a political story I had read and went down a wormhole and started writing. And that's when all the playwriting began. It was 2014.
Yeah, great. I was just going to ask about that. Again, this was a Florida Studio Theater Happy Kismet thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was even in one of the first readings we did at FST of Honor Killing.
Right,
as we were I don't know if you knew that. Yeah.
I was giving birth while that happened.
That's
so it's
right. That's
a little vague. But now that you say it, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds right.
I love this story. So I just want to set you up. You've been doing your career, acting, singing, dancing, touring, performing. All of a sudden, you literally just see a news story.
Mm-hmm.
And out of nowhere, you are compelled. Talk about an itch that you've got to scratch, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just started writing a play out of nowhere. Talk about what that story was, what compelled you about it, and then the journey of Honor Killing from, the initial idea through the workshopping and first few productions.
So I recall sitting at my desk at the time and hearing about an honor killing that had happened in Pakistan. And this woman, whose name was Farzana Parveen, was stoned to death in front of her husband, in front of many, many people on the streets, the steps of a courthouse at like 7 a.m. So multiple witnesses, including police, was killed by her family. And when I first read it, I can't explain this because I think we are all so inundated. And I know I am completely guilty of this. At this particular moment, it's saturated, somehow permeated through all of the noise. And found myself going, I just can't move past the fact that this woman was standing with her husband and police and all of these people in the morning. So it's a busy time of day. And she gets stoned to death in front of all these people who do nothing. And I don't know, somehow I think that we're living at a time where it's impossible to take in what we read and what we hear because it's so crippling. It's just so profoundly crippling that we have to protect ourselves and go like, intellectually, I hear you, but I can't feel that.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it just permeated through where I was like, I can't fathom how this is possible. And so I kept, as this story was breaking on CNN and all over, I was getting more and more information. I couldn't stop reading about it. And I just became like transfixed by this idea. Like, how could this possibly have happened? And a few days went by, and the husband who was with her, I watched an interview, I read an interview with him, and he's just completely bereft and he's in so much pain. And my heart is just bleeding for this man. And I read a couple interviews of his. And then maybe 3-4 days into it, I then hear one of the journalists happened to unearth that he had been married before and just in passing said, well, what happened to your previous wife? And he responded without a beat and said, well, I killed her to marry Farzana. And I just like, to this day, it's been held up for many years, more than 10 years, makes my hair stand up. Yeah. I thought I had lost my mind. As I'm saying, it's so easy to just check out. And I do it all the time myself because the world is so difficult in so many ways. But for some reason, that particular story just got under my skin and I was so disturbed by it that I started writing. And I did not in any way mean to write a play. I didn't even mean to write about that story. I didn't mean to write about anything else that I wrote about. This honor killing is also very much about an American Caucasian woman in the U.S. who's dealing with some issues that are around a group rape that happened. So it's not just about that particular story. But because my background is theater and because I had been in the arts for so many years, I guess that's just the vehicle with which it exited my body.
That's how it had to come out. Yeah.
It just had to come out. And then, of course, it took a long journey to FST, which was, we were talking about not editing. Once I really got into it, so much of the top of that play is written from a journalistic perspective. And I was like, I'm going to just write this. I know it's wrong. I know it's not correct. I know this is not how a journalist would handle X, Y, and Z, but I just have to get it out. And so I wrote, let's say the first 30, 40 pages, which is deeply was deeply misinformed about how stories unfold and who would be responsible for what and how would it get told and who would the journalist boss be and where would he be stationed and just all of those types of things. I didn't worry about it. I just wrote. And then even maybe before the play was even I don't even know if I'd finished a first draft. I started reaching out to journalists, and I reached out to some Pakistani journalists and international journalists. And I said, this is what I'm writing. Will anyone talk to me? And a few of them said yes. And so they got on, I got on the phone or Zoom or Skype with a number of different journalists who said that would never happen. This is what would happen. And you can't do that. So it would be done like this. And no, that's absolutely fictitious. And so I then again went back and started editing and all of that and making that more true to life. And then, of course, there are all the cultural pieces of this, which is that, I ended up very luckily being invited into part of the acting community in New York City and beyond, who was from India and Pakistan, and getting their voices into the development of this piece and doing readings in my home and then doing readings in development in studios and rewriting, becoming informed, rewriting, throwing out. And it was a long journey, but it was just so thrilling to me because I was growing and changing and learning and learning about my own ignorance. And it was just a really transformative experience. And I always feel like the reason that the play, it's highly unusual for someone to have never written a play and then all of a sudden get their play produced not only once, but multiple times and at the level it was produced. And I really believe of course it was timely and of course it's an important subject matter, but I really think it's because there was no, larger inner intention on my point from my perspective, other than talking about something and investigating something that was really, truly important to me. And that people were getting that. They were getting that, oh, she didn't write this because she was trying to get it produced or because there's some other, agenda. The agenda was simply, I have to get this out. This is important. I'm compelled. And I think people felt compelled to join me along the way and grow it because that intention was very pure.
Sarah, you were talking about how Honor Killing had a very non-traditional way to get produced. Its journey, like you said, very rarely does a playwright who's with no track record write a first play and all of a sudden it's getting regional world premieres and licensed and everything else. And you've talked earlier about Pandora being a commission. So for other playwrights out there, especially who may be trying to get their work to the stage, can you talk about some of the various paths you've taken to get works on the stage? Because there's not one right way to do it. And since you've experienced multiple, that could be really instructive, I think.
Sure. I think you really have to take advantage of the festivals, the New Play Exchange, and really getting on there. So the New Play Exchange is a platform where anybody can put up their work, and it's a very nominal fee. You can have your play listed there, and then people who are producing plays, like theaters, and to some degree some literary agents, use us as a resource to find new works. But you also can take advantage of all the festivals that run. There are so many festivals every year, and it doesn't have to be something like the Eugene O'Neill, which is amazing, but very, very competitive. There are much less, a little, we'll say, lower brow, newer off for playwrights that are just getting their first pieces out into the world. And I think if you can get into any of those festivals or if you get into any of those showcases or things like that, you start to accumulate a little bit of a bio, even if it's runner-up or first place.
Right.
It not only gives it a little cred, but people are reading your work. And, all of those festivals, all those people have committees. And so there's groups of people who are connected to the playwriting world that are reading your work and maybe getting to know your name, and getting your work out there, I think, is really integral to growing your reputation and getting up opportunities. I think Honor Killing was read by a lot more people because I did have a lot of accolades attached to it. And those accolades came from submissions like that. I've sort of stopped doing that, but I can now afford to stop doing that because I have plays that have been produced. But that I would always encourage people to take advantage of that when they're getting started.
In terms of the various plays you've written, is there a typical Sarah Bierstock method to the madness? You've talked very much about how this was a commission or this was, I saw a news story.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the boogeyman for writers is, where does your ideas come from?
Mm-hmm.
Ideas, in my mind, are around us all the time if we just kind of are open to them.
Mm-hmm.
But when an idea strikes you, do you have like a set time every day that you write? I know some writers are very regimented. Are you more just like when the spirit moves? Like, what's the Sarah Bierstock writing process?
So I would not suggest this to your listeners. This is just me. Let me be clear. I only write when I have a very specific piece that I'm working on. I am not only am I not an everyday writer, I sometimes go years without writing.
Wow.
I do not have any everyday practice about writing whatsoever. I wait until an entire idea is in my mind, and then I write the whole thing. So I am like a regurgitator of plays. I spend years subconsciously working on things, and I feel absolutely not compelled in any way to write at all until I have the instinct to write. And I think it's a real gift because I experience total freedom. I don't feel like I have to write anything. I really trust that when I'm writing something, it has merit, that it's even to me, even that I'm writing this because it's important to me to write this, not because, oh, it's so important in the world, but because I've actually it may have been germinating for 3 years, but it's in my psyche. It exists and I want to get it out.
Yeah.
If there's not something in my psyche, like I'll give you an example. I started writing something last year. It already existed in my mind. I've been thinking about it for a while. So I started writing it. Great. Scene or two, was totally into it. And then I looked at it and I was like, ooh, I just veered somewhere that I didn't mean to veer. And so I pulled back. And now I've not touched again for probably a year because it's not in my mind. I don't know yet what that is. It's germinating. And I probably won't write that until I know what it is, and then I'll write the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I'm really hands off. I'm completely hands off until there's something that is compelling me to write. I would not suggest that. That's not like a method to follow. It just happens to be mine.
Yeah, that's like it's a type of deep self-trust.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. I want to say it's because I don't want anything from it. I don't need anything from it. It's not my identity. It's something I enjoy doing it. I get a lot from it. I love I love how creative it is, and it's thrilling when something starts to leave your hands and goes into other hands, and actors get involved and designers get involved, and like that whole process is thrilling. But I don't have a need to be known as a writer or to meet some expectation of myself in that way at all. And so it's a very free relationship to me.
Is that part of just everything you do? I mean, do you
No.
still perform? Interesting.
Yeah,
like,
it's not.
do you still perform? Do you still direct? Like,
I do.
When you think of your identity, like if you have
Mm-hmm.
to introduce or shake the hand or do the elevator speech, is it, I'm Sarah Bierstock?
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
a writer, but I'm this.
Yeah, it's an awkward thing for me because honestly, my identity is much more caught up in singing and acting. And sometimes when people even introduce me as a writer, it feels very awkward to me. I'm like, oh yeah, it's just something I do. It's not. It's I have a really I'm comfortable putting the hat on, but I don't walk around with that hat on. It's much more loosely situated on the head.
Yeah,
But
so
I think
interesting.
I think that's like the whole. That's the gem. Like the lesson is so loud. We have to sort of try not to strangle things. And when there's a freedom around it, things tend to flow a lot more easily. And it's something I think a lot about because, identity is it's a big conversation about how we self-identify and why and what that represents.
Yeah.
All of that, right?
And even the duality here, the two-way where, when I first met Sarah Bierstock, it was just as a playwright. Like my perception of you
Mm-hmm.
is, first impressions last the longest, right?
Yeah,
So for me, it's
sure.
like, I've never seen you perform.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to think of you as an actor or a singer dancer, it's like intellectually, yeah, oh, sure, yeah. And there's the resume. Oh, there's the reel.
Yeah.
She's a playwright though, right?
I know. And I get that a lot. And I have to tell you, it's a very unsettling feeling for me. But then I have to pause again and go, why? Like, what is that all about?
Why is that unsettling?
Yeah. It should be, I mean, it's almost like a lark. It feels like a lark, kind of. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
let me ask you this then, because with
Mm-hmm.
all these different disciplines, I know I go through this a lot too in my work, is that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you need to sort of silo yourself so you can focus and do the deep work on the one thing you have to finish. But
Mm-hmm.
when you are performing, does your writer brain kick in sometimes? When you're acting or
Yeah.
when you're writing, we already
Mm-hmm.
talked about you had to write these monologues for Pandora.
Mm-hmm.
Your actor brain kicked in. So in terms
Yeah.
of Sarah, director, actor, playwright, how do those various aspects of you talk to each other in a
Mm-hmm.
rehearsal room or performance? Do they inform? Do they
Ye-
intersect?
They of course, man. Honestly, I think as an actor, most of the time I have to just check the playwright over there
Mm,
because I'll give
get
you an example.
dangerous.
Just very recently, I was in a reading of something that's in development, and my playwright mind had very, very clear thoughts on how to, let's just say, gently say fix, which is not. No one was asking for the play to be fixed,
Right.
but I had my own interpretations of what needed to happen to the script. Needless to say, I did not share that information.
Right.
I did not, no one asked me that. So I had nothing to say. I simply played my role. And I know how to do that. If someone asks and it's appropriate, I would be happy to share that. And I happen to think I had a really good idea of how to make the play stronger. But no one asked. So, again, you got to read the room.
Yeah.
You got to know your place. I mean, I think at this point in your life, if you're still in the arts and you're getting asked to be in pieces, you have to be respectful of the process and the room you're in. And if someone asks, it's very different than if not. Otherwise, I just kind of keep it to myself.
Sarah, so we have the writing, the acting, the singing, the dancing, and now you have added another hat, which is film. You even have a company, Pass the Salt Productions, and you've been doing short films. And so I'm just going to kind of set this runway up for you. What started how did the film bug bite? What kind of films are you making and why? And kind of similar question, how do all these various hats inform your filmmaking process?
Again, I think I'm someone who doesn't make anything unless they're compelled to. And also, I think I see things in my mind before I make them. So for instance, I have these 6 short films. They're microfilms. They're all sort of like on an Uber level, investigating how science and technology affect the psyche and affect our beings here in 2024, but in different iterations. They're not like all narrative. They just each have a bit of a woven connection of technology and science. And I visualize them in my mind before I produce them or before I start working on them. So what I'm not yet, I should say, what I am, the skill I have not yet learned is screenplay writing. At this moment, I'm not good at it. And in fact, I'm very impatient about it. And I've never really taken the time to properly learn how to do it because it's a very different medium.
Yeah.
And you express the ideas very differently. And because I tend to be very dialogue heavy and a little quippy in the dialogue, no one cares about that in film. That'll sink a film really fast. It's aesthetic. It's an aesthetic storytelling device. So I have been working with people who I can sort of storyboard with and say, let me tell you visually what I see. And if there needs to be dialogue, I'll write it. But I'm not going to write out the whole screenplay because I'll kill it. And so my collaborations have been really important. I've had to really work with people who I trust, who know me, who can kind of help me weave through what it is I'm trying to make because they have that skill set. So and this is, again, putting on the producer hat of like, I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at.
Right.
And I know how to say to other people, I see that you're good at this. Let's collaborate in this way. So in the film world, I've been good at bringing the right people together to execute the vision of what I'm trying to explore. I've always loved film. I've acted in film many times over the years. I like being on camera. It's a different skill set. I like a lot about it. It's very exciting to me. But why was I compelled to do it? For the same reasons. A story needed to be told. I had a visual of what it looked like, and so I made it.
Yeah.
I tend to just sort of plow ahead once the idea is there.
So was Past the Salt Productions created specifically to produce these films?
No, so I found myself sort of standing in the middle of a lot of different creative endeavors. Some was playwriting. So I do some audio narration for books. I also had an entire pitch to put Pandora onto an animated film.
Oh, wow.
And I found like I needed to sort of bring all of these things under one umbrella. The Wasabi Bits for the Mind, those 6 short films, was the official first project of Past the Salt Productions, but the entity of all the different creative endeavors existed before I created the production company, and then I kind of put them under one umbrella.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the audiobooks. I was going to pivot there next too. Another storytelling modality, right?
Mhm.
So what is a process when you are handed someone else's work
Mhm.
and you have to bring it to life? Multiple characters, I'm guessing. Length of recording, do you do it in batches? Is it what is kind of your audio narration world like, and what is your process to prepare for that?
Sure. So the first thing you're going to do is read the whole book. So
Right.
if it's a novel, let's just say it's a novel, you read the whole novel. Hopefully you have the time to read it a couple of times, and you start to mark it up. You have to be able to create variety in the voices and the cadence, whether there's a narrator versus, some producing studios like to have very bold choices and loud, wide variance in the characters. And some might want something that's a lot more subtle. So there can be a discussion with the producer about what they're looking for.
Mm.
But typically, I would go through and I would mark, for the most part, the entire novel. I would mark it up. I'd probably use a couple different color coding highlighters and mark up the characters into different blocks so that I had that visual cue when I go to record. And you record in several hour segments. So usually it's typically between 4.5 to 5 hour segments with breaks in between. And for, depending on how experienced you are, you're usually recording something like 15 to 17, maybe if you're really good, 20 pages an hour. And then you go through and they book you studio time based on the length of the novel. So if a novel's, I don't know, I'm just being, vague here, but if the novel's between 150, 200, 250 pages, you're probably going to record it over 3-4 sessions that are 4 or 5 hours each. And then you bang out the whole book.
How does your brain, like, I recorded my own audiobook, and
Mm-hmm.
I went in so just like, oh, come on, how hard can this be? Right. I
Yeah.
talk, I teach, I talk all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to water your voice and keep your throat, but the harder part was the mental part. Like after like
Yeah.
3 hours, my brain was mush.
Yeah. It is a mental challenge, not only because you are trying to bring life to these characters, but also because you really have to look ahead. You
Yeah.
really have to anticipate. And the skill set of being present with the language and not making mistakes while looking ahead, that's what's frying on the brain.
Yeah. I mean,
And
for me, it was even my own words, and it was still like, wah,
yeah,
wah, wah.
yeah. And the tongue and the mouth and those errors that start to happen are really because of the mental fatigue. It's not
Right.
that that you're struggling with the words, it's that your brain is doing so much at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It gets easier.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to record
Yeah.
some more.
Yeah.
This has been great, Sarah. I always like to wrap up with a couple pieces of advice and a spotlight. So I want to start with the question, what is the best advice that you have ever taken?
It's just going to sound so simple, but there's only one you.
Hmm.
There's only one Sarah Bierstock. There's only one Jason Cannon. There's only one of you. And I think we spend so much time comparing ourselves and trying to be, figuring out who we're like and emulating. And at the end of the day, like all you really have is you. And if you're creating something, hi doggy, you're creating something, use what you have. You're the only one that can say it that way. You're the only one that can write it that way. You're the only one that can think it that way. And I think being able to own that is just so incredibly freeing. And that's really all anybody really wants. They want to hear your truth. They want to hear, what specifically comes from your mind. So I think people just reflecting back to me that owning yourself and being fully who you are and allowing your creativity to come out of that is probably the most powerful creative tool that you have.
That's really good. It's always fun
I mean,
when I'm interviewing, like the advice is all over the place, but it's always fascinating. And sometimes something hits you just right. It's like, oh yeah, that's
I mean, and I look, I certainly do not hold on to that every day. There are certainly days where I'm like, oh, the last person I want to be right now is Sarah Bierstock. All I can feel are all the ways in which that is deeply challenging. However, I mean, I don't know how that there's no real argument against it, right?
Yeah, it's a practice.
It's a practice. It is a practice. Yeah.
Great. Let's flip it around. What's the worst advice you've ever given?
The worst advice I've ever given. I don't know. I think I might give really good advice. No, I'm just kidding. I feel like I don't give advice very often. Now that you're asking me this, I'm like, I can't even remember the last time I gave anyone advice. No one asks me for advice. Have I ever given advice? I mean, I guess when I say don't edit, I really mean it. I really mean it. I really mean that you need to, I need to write that way. But I think I would never want anyone to feel like that's interfering with their process, right? That if you have something that's working for you, it's about what works for you. It doesn't really matter what anybody else says. It matters what causes you to get out of your own way and be in your own flow. So, I tend to walk around saying that to sort of like bolster that idea of like, get out of your own way, get the whole thing out, don't edit, don't be precious. But, if in fact you really feel like that's stopping you, it's causing you to actually doubt yourself in a different way, then it doesn't work for you. Don't take people's advice about their process.
Right.
Just works for you. I would imagine, Jason, you're saying, would you write every day? I'm sure there are people that are going to hear that and go, oh my God, imagine how well she would write if she wrote every day. But you know what? And they may be right. They're probably totally right, but that doesn't interest me. Right. That just doesn't move me. That's just not who I am. Yeah. So I'm not really interested in offering advice, maybe because it can be not good for you. So my big takeaway is just, if somebody gives you any advice that doesn't work for you, doesn't work, let it go.
Yeah.
Let it go.
Yeah.
Let it go. And feel good about that. Feel like you have to trust yourself.
Yeah.
That you know your own instrument.
That's great. All right. Spotlight time, Sarah Bierstock.
Okay.
For anyone out there who wants to learn more about you or see your shows or your movies or whatever, how can they find you, follow you, get in touch with you?
So everything is on sarahbierstock.com. It all links to Pass the Salt Productions. There's Instagram, there's Facebook. I don't really do Twitter. I can't even remember what it's called now. But X, what is it called?
X, yeah.
Something. Yeah, everything's on my website, sarahbierstock.com. And yeah, I'm super excited about Pandora Suitcase at Syracuse. That's the next big thing. And just thrilled that it's going to be touring.
Yeah. On that tour, will there be public performances? Will only be schools? Oh, great.
Yeah. It's all of the above.
Great. So if you're within 60 miles of Syracuse, get on there this fall. You can check out Pandora Suitcase. And all the links to Sarah and Pass the Salt will be in the show summary. And Sarah, thank you so much for the double dip, for the take two. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure and my pleasure.
The Page and Stage podcast is built with Alitu, the all-in-one podcasting app created by the amazing team over at thepodcasthost.com. You can learn more about all my guests and access their websites and projects in the episode summaries. If you enjoyed and found value in this podcast, please tell at least one other person. Word of mouth has always been and will always be the best marketing tool in the world. Thank you for listening, and until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.